The air is thick with the scent of copal incense, swirling in tendrils around a towering temple under the darkening sky. Drum beats echo like a heartbeat, growing faster as figures draped in feathered robes ascend the steps, their faces hidden behind ornate masks. Below, a crowd watches in silence, their eyes fixed on the priest raising a glinting obsidian blade. This is no scene from a movie. It's a glimpse into the real, mesmerizing world of Aztec rituals, ceremonies so complex and enigmatic that even today, archaeologists struggle to unravel their secrets. Centuries after the fall of Tenochtitlan, these ancient practices continue to mystify us. How could a civilization so advanced in astronomy, medicine, and art also perform rituals that seem almost otherworldly? Some were tied to the cycles of the sun and moon, while others involved offerings so strange they defy modern understanding. Yet despite decades of excavations, translations of crumbling codices, and cutting-edge technology, key pieces of the puzzle remain missing. What were they truly trying to communicate, and why do some of these rituals still send chills down our spines? That's exactly what we're about to explore. From sacred ballgames with deadly stakes to ceremonies where echoes of the past seem to whisper through time, we're diving into 25 Aztec rituals that leave even the most seasoned experts scratching their heads. You'll witness the line between devotion and mystery blur, uncovering acts of faith that challenge everything we think we know about this legendary empire. So take a step closer, because the deeper we go, the more these ancient whispers begin to sound like questions waiting for answers. One of the most haunting rituals of the Aztec world was the Flayed Skin Ceremony, a practice so visceral it still unsettles modern scholars. Imagine the scene after a sacrificial victim's heart was offered to the gods. Their body would be carefully skinned by priests using razor-sharp obsidian blades, tools so precise archaeologists have found them buried beneath temple floors. The priest would then step into the dripping skin like a macabre suit, wearing it for 20 days as it decayed upon his body. Stone carvings at sites like Templo Mayor show these skin-clad figures, their grotesque folds meticulously etched into the rock, a testament to how central this ritual was to their beliefs. But why? The answers remain as layered as the ritual itself. Some researchers believe it symbolized the cycle of renewal, corn husks shed to make way for new growth, mirrored in the shedding of human skin. Others argue it was an act of ultimate devotion, the priest embodying the god Xipe Totec, the Flayed One, who represented both death and agricultural rebirth. Then there are those who see it as a display of dominance, a way to instill awe and fear in the empire's subjects. The truth might be all of these things intertwined, because in the Aztec worldview, life and death weren't opposites but parts of an endless loop. Even the tools tell a story. Those flaying knives weren't crude instruments but sacred objects, often decorated with turquoise and gold, suggesting this wasn't mere brutality but a ritual of profound spiritual weight. Yet despite the carvings, the artifacts, even accounts from Spanish chroniclers who witnessed these ceremonies, we're left with an unsettling question: how did it feel to wear another's skin? And what unspoken truths died with the last priest who performed it? Xipe Totec wasn't just a fearsome figure to the Aztecs, he was a paradox, a deity of both creation and destruction, his very name meaning "our Lord the Flayed One." To understand why priests would wear rotting skin for 20 days, we have to step into the Aztec worldview, where gods weren't distant beings but forces that demanded participation. Every flaying knife cut was a dialogue. Some scholars point to Xipe Totec's link with spring, when maize sheds its husk to reveal new life beneath. Murals at Teotihuacan show him holding sprouting plants, while pottery depicts fresh shoots emerging from his elbows, literal rebirth sprouting from decay. But there's another, darker layer. Spanish chroniclers wrote that some flayed skins came from captured warriors, leading experts to debate whether this was also about conquest. Imagine the message: an enemy's flesh transformed into a sacred garment, their strength absorbed by the empire. Templo Mayor excavations reveal skull racks near Xipe Totec shrines, hinting at a grisly duality: agricultural renewal feeding off the spoils of war. The most chilling clue might be in the timing. The festival of Xipe Totec coincided with the dry season's end, when crops withered and the earth seemed dead. By dressing in death, the priest became the living bridge between barren fields and coming harvests. Modern botanists note something uncanny. The 20 days of wearing skin matched the germination period of Aztec maize. Was this ritual a cosmic countdown, human suffering measured in corn sprouts? Yet contradictions linger. Some codices show Xipe Totec adorned with gold, his flayed skin gleaming like precious metal. Was this about poverty transformed into wealth, or a metaphor for the god who renewed himself by shedding his own divine flesh? Perhaps the most unsettling theory comes from recent isotope analysis on sacrificial knives. Traces of hallucinogens suggest priests might have entered trances, not just wearing skin but becoming the god himself. What's undeniable is how deeply this ritual was woven into Aztec life. Farmers offered the first ears of corn to Xipe Totec shrines. Children wore flayed skins during coming-of-age ceremonies. Even goldsmiths invoked him when casting metal. This wasn't mere spectacle, it was a thread connecting battlefields to cornfields, kings to peasants, death to breakfast. And that's the real mystery: how a ritual so graphic could also be, in its way, deeply ordinary. Picture an empire holding its breath, every hearth dark, every flame snuffed out, the night air heavy with anticipation. This was the new fire ceremony, a ritual so crucial that the entire Aztec world hinged on its success. Every 52 years, a cycle they called the binding of years, priests would watch the stars for the moment the Pleiades crossed the zenith at midnight. If the constellation didn't align perfectly, their worst fears whispered that the sun might never rise again. The preparations were meticulous. Broken pots and tools found buried near temples reveal how families cleansed their homes, discarding old possessions as if shedding the past. Then, at the critical hour, fire priests would climb the hill of the star near Tenochtitlan. A captive warrior, chosen for his courage, would be stretched across a stone. As the Pleiades reached their zenith, the high priest would plunge a fire drill into the victim's chest, twisting it until flames burst forth, a literal spark of life torn from human flesh. Excavations of ceremonial braziers show something astonishing. The clay linings are charred but intact, suggesting these weren't ordinary fires. Some contain traces of rubber and incense, materials known to burn at sacred temperatures. But the real mystery lies in the timing. Modern astronomers have run backward calculations, and here's where it gets eerie. The Aztec observations were so precise they accounted for what we now call precession, the gradual shift of stars over centuries. How did a civilization without telescopes achieve this? Different theories collide. One faction of archaeologists points to the alignment of temple stairways, which may have served as giant calendrical markers. Others argue the answer lies in the Dresden Codex, where Maya astronomers whose knowledge influenced the Aztecs recorded Venus cycles with jaw-dropping accuracy. Then there's the unsettling practicality of it all. Some scholars suggest the 52-year cycle was as much about social control as celestial events, a way to reinforce the empire's power by literally holding life and light hostage. Yet perhaps the most haunting evidence comes from an unexpected place: child burials. Near ceremonial sites, archaeologists have uncovered infants interred with charred wood in their hands. Were these offerings to guarantee the new fire's purity, or a darker insurance policy against cosmic catastrophe? The answers may lie encrypted in star charts we're only beginning to decode, written in ashes and obsidian shadows. The ball court echoes with the thunder of rubber balls slamming against stone, players clad in heavy padding hurtling across the sacred arena. But this was no ordinary sport. For the Aztecs, the ritual ball game was a matter of life and death, a cosmic battle where the stakes ran far deeper than points or pride. At sites like El Tajan, carvings showed chilling scenes, players kneeling beside their own severed heads, grinning as if death were the ultimate victory. These weren't just artworks, they were windows into a ceremony where the line between game and sacrifice blurred beyond recognition. But who paid the ultimate price, the losers or the winners? Spanish accounts describe matches where the victors earned the honor of sacrifice, their blood ensuring the sun's continued rise. Yet archaeologists have unearthed a puzzle. Skeletal remains near ball courts show no clear pattern of trauma matching these accounts. Some skulls bear marks of ceremonial defleshing, while others appear untouched. Could the carvings be symbolic rather than literal? The answer might lie in the ballgame's dual nature. Murals at Chichen Itza depict teams dressed as gods of day and night, suggesting each match reenacted the eternal struggle between light and darkness. Forensic studies of the few confirmed sacrificial victims reveal something unexpected. Many had healed injuries from past games, proving they were seasoned players. Were these warriors who volunteered for the ritual, their deaths predetermined from the moment they stepped onto the court? Then there's the ball itself, a 10-pound sphere of solid rubber that could crush bones on impact. Recreations show players using hips and elbows to deflect its brutal momentum, a feat requiring years of training. Modern chemists analyzing residue on ancient balls found traces of morning glory sap, a hallucinogen that may have altered players' perceptions, blurring the boundary between ritual and reality. Perhaps the most telling clue comes from the court's alignment. At El Tajan, the main ball court points directly at the setting sun during equinoxes, turning each game into a celestial countdown. Winners or losers, the real opponent may have been time itself, the Aztecs' relentless race against the dying of the light. And that's the haunting legacy of these games, not just who died, but why their deaths were woven so deeply into the fabric of play. Beneath the stone gaze of Tlaloc, the rain god whose tears fed the crops, children stood adorned with jade beads, their small bodies trembling not just from fear, but from days of forced crying. Archaeologists excavating the Templo Mayor made a chilling discovery: the skeletal remains of children, their eye sockets stained with traces of copal resin, evidence that priests had applied irritants to keep their tears flowing until the final moment. These weren't quiet deaths. Spanish chroniclers wrote of processions where sobbing children, dressed in blue to mirror Tlaloc's watery realm, were carried to mountain shrines during droughts. But here's where the mystery deepens. Not all these sacrifices coincided with dry spells. Some occurred in years of plenty, their timing matching Venus's appearance as the morning star. The debate among scholars hinges on two conflicting clues. On one hand, forensic analysis of teeth from victims reveals periods of severe malnutrition, suggesting desperation drove these acts. On the other, murals at Teotihuacan depict Tlaloc cradling drowned children, implying their deaths symbolized rain's return regardless of immediate need. Isotope studies complicate things further. Some children came from distant regions, possibly gifted by subject nations as living tribute. Were these rituals about whether control, political theater, or something more profound? Recent LiDAR scans of Mount Tlaloc uncovered something startling: a hidden network of channels designed to funnel rainwater into stone basins exactly where child remains were found. This wasn't just symbolism, it was hydraulic engineering merged with sacrifice. Yet the most haunting detail lies in the jade. Each child's mouth held a bead carved like a raindrop, not haphazardly placed but secured with plant fibers to ensure it stayed during decomposition. The message was clear: these children weren't just offered to Tlaloc, they became Tlaloc, their eternal tears ensuring the world's survival. Why the disagreement among experts? Because the answer may be all these things at once. Droughts may have triggered the practice, but the ritual evolved into a cosmic necessity, a way to anchor the universe's balance through the most vulnerable. The children's bones whisper this duality. Some show healed fractures from hard labor, others bear signs of elite diets. Whether pawns or divine messengers, their deaths wove together ecology, astronomy, and empire in ways we're only beginning to understand. The obsidian blade flashes downward, an act so swift that Spanish chroniclers claimed a priest could extract a living heart in under 12 seconds. This was no butcher's work, but a sacred geometry of precision. Ribs pried apart, the pericardium slit, the still-beating organ lifted toward the sun with ceremonial cries. Modern forensic pathologists have tried to replicate it using replicas of those volcanic glass knives, only to falter at the sheer speed described. How could a civilization without steel achieve what even today's surgeons with their scalpel's edge find astonishing? The answer may lie in the training. Aztec codices depict novices practicing on straw dummies stuffed with animal hearts, their movements drilled until they became reflex. But there's another clue: the positioning. Murals at Mesoamerica show victims arched backward over convex stones, their spines hyperextended to stretch the chest cavity. Archaeologists testing this technique found it creates unnatural gaps between ribs, granting access with minimal cutting. Some victims may have been drugged. Residue analyses on sacrificial knives revealed traces of jimsonweed, a potent paralytic that would have stilled convulsions without dulling consciousness. Yet contradictions emerge. While Spanish accounts emphasize speed, skeletal remains tell a different story. Some rib cages display multiple cut marks, suggesting trial and error rather than flawless execution. A recent CT scan of one skull revealed something even more telling: fractures consistent with a blunt tool, perhaps a priest's ceremonial staff used to stun the victim first. Was the 12-second heart more propaganda than fact, a myth perpetuated to magnify the ritual's terror? The tools themselves complicate the mystery. Obsidian scalpels, sharper than surgical steel yet brittle, would shatter if twisted. But excavations at Tenochtitlan uncovered something unexpected: knives with microscopic grooves along the edge, a deliberate serration that may have allowed cleaner cuts with less pressure. Modern engineers replicating these blades found they reduce slippage by 30%, a design refinement previously thought impossible without metallurgy. Perhaps the most haunting detail comes from the victim's remains. Isotope analysis of teeth from sacrificial prisoners reveals many were fed a special diet for months high in maize and magi sap, which thickens the blood. Was this compassion or calculation? Thicker blood would have slowed fatal bleeding, extending those crucial seconds when the heart could still be offered, alive, to the gods. Every element, from blade angle to biochemistry, suggests a ritual honed over generations, where science and spirituality merged in one breathtaking, brutal moment. What unsettles researchers isn't just the technical mastery, but the intimacy of it. Codices show priests whispering to victims as they worked, their faces inches apart. The act wasn't just removal, it was transformation, a heart becoming the sun's food mid-beat. In the end, the greatest mystery isn't how they did it, but how they reconciled such precision with reverence, turning anatomy into prayer. The precise placement of excised hearts wasn't random. It followed patterns as deliberate as the constellations the Aztecs tracked. Archaeologists excavating Templo Mayor's concentric altars discovered something startling. Each heart deposit formed points in a celestial map, mirroring the night sky's brightest stars. One pit contained 21 hearts arranged in the shape of Orion's belt, their positions matching astronomical charts from the Codex Mendoza. But here's what baffles researchers: these configurations shift between sacrificial sites. At Tenochtitlan's center, hearts aligned with the summer solstice sunrise, while outlying temples positioned them to mark Venus's extremes. The vessels holding these offerings tell another layer of the story. Some were simple clay bowls, but others, like the famous Coyolxauhqui monolith, functioned as sacred landscapes in miniature. This massive stone disc, carved with the dismembered moon goddess, wasn't just a backdrop. Its concave surface channeled blood runoff into grooves that traced the contours of Lake Texcoco. Forensic chemists analyzing residue found that certain sections retained more iron, suggesting priests placed hearts specifically where the rivers converged. Were they recreating the myth of Huitzilopochtli defeating his sister or mapping some deeper cosmic balance? Recent LiDAR scans reveal an even grander design. When plotted across the valley, major heart deposit sites form a quadrilateral matching the Aztecs' axis mundi, their concept of the world's 5 directional poles. But there's a disturbing anomaly. One corner near Texcoco's shores shows no temple remains, just a sunken pit filled with heart-shaped jade ornaments. Some scholars believe this ghost altar was deliberately left empty, a void representing the underworld's hunger. Others argue it's proof of a ritual too secret to build in stone. The most poignant clue comes from the victims themselves. Isotope analysis shows those sacrificed at stellar pits often came from regions corresponding to that part of the sky. A warrior from northern deserts placed in a Scorpio-aligned offering, a fisherman from eastern coasts in one marking the morning star. Their deaths weren't just symbolic, they became living stars fixed in an earthly firmament. What we're uncovering isn't mere ceremony, it's a vanished geography where flesh became constellation, and every heartbeat plotted the universe's turning. Rows of hollow eyes stare from wooden beams, not trophies of war, but something far more unsettling. The T's Ampantli or skull racks of Tenochtitlan weren't just displays of power, they were living calendars, spiritual batteries, and perhaps even bridges between worlds. When archaeologists uncovered the T's Ampantli near Templo Mayor, they expected grisly confirmation of Spanish accounts describing tens of thousands of skulls. Instead, they found a meticulously organized structure where every fifth skull bore precise holes drilled through the temples. These weren't battle wounds, they were intentional modifications, and their purpose sparks fierce debate even today. One theory comes from studying the drill marks themselves. Microscopic analysis reveals the tools used were identical to those employed by Aztec jewelers, suggesting the holes served a decorative function. Spanish chroniclers mention skulls threaded with cords of human hair and adorned with turquoise, transforming them into macabre ornaments. But there's another possibility. Recent 3D scans show the perforations align at angles that would allow wind to pass through, creating eerie whistles. Imagine the soundscape of Tenochtitlan, a chorus of bone flutes singing with every breeze, a literal music of the dead. The arrangement tells another story. Unlike haphazard piles seen in other cultures, these skulls formed precise geometric patterns. Some rows alternated male and female, while others grouped juveniles separately. Forensic anthropologists made a chilling discovery. Many skulls show signs of healing from previous injuries, proving these individuals survived wounds long before sacrifice. Were they honored warriors, or did the Aztecs believe suffering made the skulls more potent? Then there's the matter of duration. While most assume skulls were displayed until they decayed, soil chemistry near the racks suggests otherwise. Phosphorus levels indicate some remained in place for decades, periodically treated with preservatives like pine resin. This wasn't temporary intimidation, it was permanent infrastructure. Most perplexing are the accounts of animated skulls. Bernardino de Sahagun wrote of priests manipulating jaws with cords during rituals, making them speak. Recent excavations uncovered small copper hinges still attached to mandibles, hinting at mechanisms far more sophisticated than previously imagined. Whether oracle or theater, these racks were more than warnings. They were puppets of the divine, their empty eyes watching over an empire that believed death was just another kind of breath. Flames lick at the edges of a towering figure made not of stone or clay, but of fragile bark paper, a god conjured from the very trees that shaded sacred groves. The Aztecs called these effigies amatzintli, divine embodiments crafted to be destroyed, their ashes carrying prayers skyward. What survives in the Codex Borgia shows strange contradictions. Why would a civilization that built enduring temples create deities meant to vanish in smoke? The answer may lie in the material itself. Paper made from the inner bark of wild fig trees was no ordinary substance. Microscopic analysis of surviving fragments reveals embedded flower pollen and ground jade, turning each effigy into a living mosaic of sacred elements. These weren't generic idols. The Borgia depicts specific gods receiving this treatment. Xochipilli, lord of art and dance, appears mid-combustion with musical instruments melting into his limbs. Tlazolteotl, goddess of filth and purification, is shown as a paper figure absorbing sins before crumbling to ash. But here's the puzzle. Other major deities like Huitzilopochtli never appear in this form. Archaeologists studying temple hearths found charred paper remnants only near shrines to agricultural and creative gods, suggesting these rituals dealt with cycles of temporary abundance rather than eternal power. The burning process itself was shockingly precise. Spanish chroniclers describe priests using cords to lower effigies limb by limb into flames, timing each section's destruction to match poetic verses. Modern experiments with replica paper mixtures show certain formulas burned slower, allowing this controlled dissolution. Some even produced colored smoke, possibly mirroring the god's attributes. Perhaps the most haunting clue comes from an overlooked detail in the Borgia. Tiny holes pierced through the paper god's hands and feet. At first dismissed as artistic convention, recent conservation work revealed these were actual punctures made while the paper was damp. Were these anchor points for strings, turning the effigies into puppets enacting sacred dramas before their end? Or did they represent portals, acknowledging the fleeting nature of divine presence? What's clear is that this ritual embraced impermanence as sacred. Unlike stone carvings meant to outlast empires, these paper gods lived and died with the seasons. Their ashes, recovered from ceremonial pits, often contained seeds, suggesting they were mixed with next year's planting soil. In a civilization obsessed with cycles, perhaps the greatest power lay not in permanence but in knowing when to let go. High above the jungle floor, 4 men spin upside down from ropes, their bodies arcing outward like human constellations as the towering pine pole creaks beneath them. This is the Volador ceremony, a spectacle so mesmerizing that Spanish chroniclers couldn't help but record it, yet one that leaves archaeologists puzzling over what they might have left out. The surviving poles at El Tajan tell part of the story. Grooves worn into the wood reveal where ropes once anchored, each precisely spaced to ensure 13 rotations before the dancers touched ground, mirroring the Aztec solar calendar. But colonial accounts describe only joyous performances, with no mention of what earlier carvings suggest: figures plunging headfirst from the platform, their ropes severed mid-flight. Excavations at the pole bases add fuel to the debate. Beneath one at El Tajan, researchers found a cache of obsidian blades and a single cervical vertebra with clean-cut marks. Was this an offering to sanctify the pole or evidence of a darker practice? Some scholars point to the Codex Borgia, where a similar scene shows a Volador with his rope ending not in a graceful descent but in a spray of blood. Others argue these are symbolic representations of the sun's sacrifice as it sets each evening. The physics of the ritual deepens the mystery. Modern recreations prove 5 flyers are needed for stability, yet pre-Hispanic art consistently shows 4. This missing 5th role might hold the key colonial text's reference: a musician priest who stayed atop the pole, beating a drum to time the rotations. But at Totonac sites still practicing the ritual today, that 5th figure sometimes wears a skull mask and scatters maize kernels between the ropes. Could this echo an ancient counterpart who scattered something far more potent? Even the poles themselves whisper contradictions. Dendrochronology dates some to the Aztec era, yet their wood comes from forests hundreds of miles away, trees felled, transported, and erected with staggering effort for a mere spectacle. Then there's the orientation. At El Tajin, the poles align so flyers' shadows intersect at solar noon during equinoxes, tracing a perfect quincunx, the Aztec symbol for the cosmos. Perhaps the truth lies in blending both narratives. The Spanish, eager to portray indigenous rituals as reformed under Christianity, may have emphasized the ceremony's celebratory aspects while omitting its sacrificial roots. Yet the Aztecs themselves saw duality in everything: life and death, joy and solemnity, spinning high above the earth while still tethered to it. The real Volador ritual might not have been either performance or sacrifice, but both, a dance where the boundary between celebration and devotion was as fluid as the arcs traced against the sky. Steam rises in thick clouds as the stone walls of the Temazcal glow hot to the touch. This was no ordinary sauna, but a portal between worlds. Archaeologists excavating these domed sweat baths across Mesoamerica keep uncovering clues that blur the line between hospital and temple. At Tlatelolco, one Temazcal still had its original basalt seats arranged in a perfect square, each position corresponding to a cardinal direction. Yet what really caught researchers' attention were the artifacts buried beneath the floor: obsidian blades wrapped in medicinal herbs and tiny clay figurines with their heads ritually broken off. The healing properties are undeniable. Analysis of soot deposits reveals burnt remains of eucalyptus, sage, and even psychoactive plants like ololiuqui, creating a steam that could relieve respiratory ailments or induce visions. But the spiritual dimension runs deeper. Murals at Totnango show figures entering Temazcals wearing deity masks, suggesting these weren't just therapeutic sessions but transformations. The most revealing find came from a bath near Melanalco, a stone drain carved with the face of Tlazolteotl, the goddess who consumed sins. Water samples from the channel contained traces of human sweat mixed with pulque, an alcoholic offering that may have purified bathers' transgressions as literally as it cleansed their pores. Stranger still are the accounts of contrasting immersions. Spanish friars wrote of participants leaping from scalding heat into icy springs, a practice mirrored in the architecture. LiDAR scans show many Temazcals built adjacent to cenotes or artificial pools. Some scholars believe this rapid temperature shift triggered physiological states conducive to spiritual experiences. Modern studies confirm such shocks can release endorphins and alter consciousness. The biggest puzzle lies in who used these spaces. Skeletal remains from nearby graves show two distinct groups: those with healed injuries from battle or labor, and others with malformations suggesting congenital illnesses. Were these baths hospitals for the wounded or sanctuaries for those considered touched by the gods? Perhaps both, a place where pain and divinity intertwined like steam and smoke, healing not just the body but the soul's fractures too. The most haunting evidence comes from a Temazcal at Templo Mayor's base. Beneath its bench, archaeologists found a child's footprint preserved in hardened ash, tiny toes pressed into the floor as if bracing against heat. Next to it lay a broken whistle shaped like Ehecatl, the wind god, maybe to carry prayers upward or to signal when the steam became too much to bear. In this space where breath turned visible, perhaps the boundary between suffering and transcendence was as thin as the veil of condensation on stone. What emerges isn't just a medicinal practice but a microcosm of Aztec cosmology. The Temazcal's dome mirrored the vault of heaven, its heat echoing the sun's fire, while the act of sweating became a kind of alchemy, turning the body's weakness into spiritual currency. Modern saunas may relax muscles, but these chambers transformed flesh into something far more potent, a bridge between earthly suffering and divine understanding. The sting of obsidian slicing into flesh wasn't reserved for priests or warriors, ordinary farmers, potters. Even children participated in bloodletting rituals so extreme they left skeletal evidence of repeated self-inflicted wounds. Excavations near Templo Mayor uncovered hundreds of ceremonial blades buried in household courtyards, each stained with traces of human blood despite showing no signs of sacrificial use. These weren't the pristine knives of temple ceremonies, but worn, reused tools, their edges dulled from years of ritual scraping. Forensic anthropologists studying the remains of commoners made a chilling discovery. Some leg bones bore parallel grooves exactly matching these blades' widths, proof of individuals reopening the same cuts over decades. Why would someone willingly endure such pain? The answer lies in the Aztec concept of chalchihuatl, a precious water. Blood wasn't just an offering, it was currency, a way for commoners to pay their cosmic debts without access to grand temples. Murals at Tepantitla show farmers piercing their tongues with magi spines while holding bowls to catch the blood, which was then poured onto corn seeds before planting. Modern chemical analysis of these murals reveals something astonishing. The red pigment contains hemoglobin derivatives, suggesting artists mixed actual blood into the paint, immortalizing the act in the very medium it celebrated. But the risks were very real. Skeletons from working-class neighborhoods show infections in repeatedly cut shin bones, and some skulls bear marks of emergency trepanation, crude holes drilled to relieve swelling from botched scalp incisions. Spanish accounts describe seeing elderly men with calves scarred like plowed fields, yet these individuals clearly survived years of ritual injury. How recent studies of pre-Hispanic medicinal plants point to a possible answer. Residue on blades from sites like Tenochtitlan's outskirts contains traces of coagulants like Yortley paste, a mint family herb still used today to staunch bleeding. The most poignant finds come from child burials. At a neighborhood near Texcoco, archaeologists uncovered the skeleton of a 12-year-old with over 30 healed cuts on her thighs, each spaced precisely 2 finger widths apart, following patterns seen in codices depicting starter rituals. Her bones showed no signs of malnutrition, suggesting this wasn't coercion but a family tradition. Nearby lay a tiny obsidian blade wrapped in cotton, its edge barely used, perhaps her first ritual tool, placed in the grave as both offering and promise. What unsettles researchers isn't the violence of these acts, but their intimacy. Unlike temple sacrifices performed by elites, this bloodletting happened in homes, with parents teaching children how to angle blades to avoid arteries. The implements themselves tell this story. Some handles are carved with fingerprints worn smooth from generations of grip. This was devotion stripped of spectacle, where the sacred flowed as quietly as blood into a clay bowl at dawn. Beneath the floor of a noblewoman's house in Coyoacán, archaeologists unearthed a lacquered box that appended decades of assumptions. Inside lay an obsidian blade with a handle carved in the shape of a quetzal bird, its edge stained dark with centuries-old blood. This wasn't some ceremonial relic, but a well-worn tool, its grip polished smooth by countless rituals. Similar finds soon followed: bone awls tipped with hematite, jade-tipped stingray spines, even copper needles threaded with human hair, all buried in residential areas where women lived and worked. These artifacts tell a story Spanish chroniclers never recorded. Bloodletting wasn't just the domain of priests and warriors. Aztec women, it seems, had their own sacred covenant with the gods. What makes these implements so startling is their contrast with temple offerings. While male-dominated sacrifices often involved dramatic heart extraction, these household tools suggest subtler, sustained practices. Microscopic analysis reveals something even more revealing. Residue on the blades contains traces of menstrual blood mixed with copal incense, a combination not found in any male-associated ritual artifacts. Murals at Teotihuacan's Palace of the Quetzalcoatl now take on new meaning. Scenes once interpreted as goddess worship show women drawing blood from their thighs and tongues, their collected offerings sprinkled onto corn kernels. This wasn't passive participation, it was active, necessary spiritual labor. The biological aspect adds another layer. Recent studies of Aztec medicinal texts reveal recipes for iron-rich tonics made from duckweed and clay substances modern hematologists confirm would have countered anemia from frequent blood loss. One burial near Tlatelolco held a high-status woman with over 200 healed puncture marks on her arms, her bones showing levels of iron supplementation that would have required precise knowledge of physiology. She wasn't just practicing ritual, she was mastering it. Perhaps most telling are the locations of these finds. Unlike temple sacrifices concentrated in Tenochtitlan's center, women's bloodletting tools appear empire-wide in merchant enclaves, farming villages, even the distant garrison town of Ocoyocac. This was no elite monopoly, but a grassroots tradition. The implements themselves reflect this diversity. Some are crudely fashioned from local stone, others are masterpieces of lapidary work. What unites them is their intimacy. Many show minuscule etchings of goddess names, Tlazolteotl for purification, Xochiquetzal for fertility, suggesting each tool was personalized for its owner's spiritual needs. The biggest shift comes from reinterpreting old evidence. Those child burials with tiny perforators half belong to girls, the so-called warrior initiation scenes in codices. Closer inspection shows many figures wearing the knee-length huipil dresses of unmarried women. Even the Florentine Codex, compiled by Spanish friars, contains overlooked passages describing elderly women presiding over auto-sacrifice rites during planting seasons. What emerges is a spiritual economy where gender roles weren't hierarchies but partnerships, men's large-scale temple sacrifices feeding the sun, women's sustained offerings nurturing the earth. The real revelation lies in the bones themselves. Skeletal studies now confirm Aztec women lived longer than men despite frequent bloodletting, their remains showing fewer infections and better healed wounds. This wasn't reckless self-harm, but precise sacred science, a dialogue between body and cosmos, where every drop of blood carried prayers not just to gods, but through generations of women who knew their veins connected to something far greater. The air still smells faintly of toasted amaranth and honey as the last crumbs of the god vanish between worshippers' teeth, an edible deity born at dawn, devoured by dusk. These weren't just ritual snacks, but sacred beings molded from tizoli dough, their forms so lifelike Spanish friars recoiled at the sight of congregants weeping while consuming what they called the flesh of Huitzilopochtli. Yet despite vivid descriptions in codices like the Florentine and Borbonicus, archaeologists have never found a single crumb of these dough idols. The reason lies in the very nature of their sacrifice, not by fire or blade, but by ingestion, leaving behind only ghostly echoes in art and memory. What made these fragile figures so powerful? The ingredients tell part of the story. Chemical analysis of residue in ritual mixing bowls reveals a precise formula: ground amaranth seeds mixed with megi syrup and human blood, baked just enough to hold shape but remain chewable. Murals at Teopanzolco show priests adding a final touch: rubies of prickly pear fruit pressed into the dough as hearts, their red juice mimicking divine vitality. These weren't abstract symbols. The Codex Magliebkiano depicts dough gods with individualized features, from the serpentine coils of Quetzalcoatl to the gnarled fingers of the earth monster Tlalochtecutli. The ritual's transience was its strength. Unlike stone statues, these edible idols required constant renewal, needed at midnight, shaped at sunrise, killed by noon. Spanish accounts describe how children were tasked with gathering the crumbs, ensuring not a speck of the sacred remained unconsumed. Modern food scientists note something ingenious: amaranth's high lysine content would have made these idols nutritionally potent, transforming spiritual practice into tangible sustenance during lean harvest months. But the real mystery lies in the act itself. Why eat your god? Some scholars point to parallels with Christian Eucharist, but the Aztec practice was strikingly literal. The Codex Tudela shows worshippers biting into limbs labeled with deity names. Others argue it mirrored agricultural cycles: seeds must be destroyed in the earth to sprout anew. The most compelling clue comes from an overlooked detail in Sahagun's notes. Participants described hallucinogenic effects after consumption. Recent tests show amaranth dough mixed with certain wild honeys can ferment rapidly, producing mild psychotropic compounds. What survives isn't physical evidence but culinary memory. Today's Alegria candies amaranth bars sold in Mexican markets retain the ancient RECIPES Chinese letter without its sacred context. The dough god's legacy lingers in this paradox, a ritual so intimate it left no trace, yet so powerful its taste still haunts us centuries later. The jade mask stares upward with empty eyes, its delicate lashes etched so finely that even under microscopes, modern carvers can't replicate the strokes. Found pressed against the skull of an Aztec noblewoman in a tomb near Texcoco, this wasn't mere burial finery but a sacred skin, its cool green surface believed to guide the soul through the underworld's 9 rivers. What baffles archaeologists isn't the artistry, though the masks rank among Mesoamerica's most exquisite creations, but their sudden disappearance around 1450, decades before Cortés landed. Jade mines still flowed with raw material, rulers still held power, and the tradition had endured for centuries. So why did this practice vanish when everything else continued? Start with the masks themselves. Unlike Maya examples carved in high relief, Aztec versions were astonishingly thin, some barely thicker than an almond shell, and required backlighting to reveal their translucency. Recent CT scans of the Texcoco mask show something startling. The jade had been chemically treated with a citrus-based solution, possibly to soften it for carving. Yet the same technology appears in later Aztec jewelry, proving the knowledge didn't disappear. What changed was the context. Earlier masks featured closed eyes and serene expressions, while the final examples unearthed at Tlatelolco show widened stares and parted lips, almost as if capturing a moment of shock. The burial arrangements deepen the mystery. Elite tombs before 1450 follow a strict pattern, masks placed over the face, hands folded on the chest holding jade beads. Later interments, even those of emperors like Moctezuma I, contain lavish jewels but no masks. One clue comes from beneath the Great Pyramid. Workers excavating its 4th stage discovered a cache of broken masks deliberately buried under construction fill. The fractures aren't accidental. Chisel marks suggest ritual destruction. Was this a theological shift or something darker? Spanish accounts hint at a possible answer. When conquistadors asked about the mask's absence, Aztec historians described a prophecy that the gods would no longer recognize the faces of the dead unless they arrived naked in spirit. Some scholars connect this to the rise of the Mexica warrior cult, where death in battle guaranteed paradise without need for material guides. Others point to pollen analysis from mask burials revealing an eerie trend. The final examples contain traces of a now extinct orchid species once associated with forgotten underworld deities. Perhaps the most haunting evidence lies in what replaced them. Shortly after masks disappeared, murals began depicting ancestors with golden solar discs over their faces, a material the Aztecs associated with the sun's surface rather than the earth's veins. In their cosmology, jade represented the watery underworld, while gold embodied the fiery heavens. The abandonment of masks may signal not a loss of skill, but a revolution in how the Aztecs envisioned the afterlife, trading the cool green embrace of the earth for the scorching radiance of the sun. What lingers is the craftsmanship itself. Modern gemologists estimate each mask required 600 hours of polishing with reed fibers and quartz sand, equal to an artisan's entire year. These weren't mass-produced items but singular acts of devotion, their last examples bearing tiny, frantic chisel marks as if carved against time. When we peer into their empty eye sockets today, we're not just seeing abandoned artistry, we're witnessing the moment an empire decided some traditions weren't meant to outlive their makers. Laughter erupts through the temple plaza, but this is no ordinary jest. Masked figures with bulbous noses and exaggerated bellies wobble across the stones, parodying the stiff movements of priests and kings. These weren't mere entertainers, they were the sacred clowns or huhuyotl performers whose antics walked a razor's edge between devotion and defiance. Spanish chroniclers described scenes where clowns mimicked the emperor's speeches in squeaky voices or pretended to stumble drunkenly during solemn rites, yet these same jesters also held positions of shocking privilege. They could touch sacred relics forbidden even to nobles, and their words were said to carry the weight of prophecy. Behind the grease paint and ruffled costumes lay a paradox. Murals at Teotihuacan depict clowns with their faces split, half grinning, half grotesque, a visual metaphor for their dual role. On one hand, their mockery reinforced order by allowing controlled release of social tensions, much like the medieval European court jester. But archaeological evidence suggests something far more subversive. Excavations near the Great Temple uncovered a hidden chamber filled with broken figurines, each one a caricature of rulers with exaggerated features, their heads deliberately snapped off. Were these props for ritual performances or covert political critique? The clowns' most startling power lay in their immunity. While commoners faced execution for insulting authority, these performers could openly ridicule the elite without consequence. Some scholars argue this wasn't tolerance, but psychological manipulation by channeling dissent into ritualized mockery. The state neutralized real rebellion. Others point to accounts of clowns suddenly dropping their buffoonery mid-performance to deliver ominous warnings about crop failures or military defeats, their voices shifting unnervingly from shrill mockery to solemn tones. A key clue comes from the costumes themselves. Unlike standard Aztec attire woven from cotton, clown garments recovered from dry caves near Zacatecas were fashioned from prickly megi fibers, a plant associated with penitence and pain. Even their rattles contained sinister details. Some were crafted from human finger bones, their sound mimicking the click of skeletal joints. This wasn't just comedy, it was memento mori disguised as farce. The most revealing find came from a clown's burial at Tlatelolco. Beneath the layers of patchwork fabric, archaeologists discovered a polished obsidian mirror strapped to the performer's chest, a tool used by priests for divination. Perhaps the greatest joke of all was that these fools may have been the empire's most astute observers, holding up a mirror to society while everyone laughed at the reflection. What really unsettles researchers is how abruptly these rituals ended. In the final years before conquest, chronicles describe clowns abandoning satire for outright warnings. One reportedly stripped naked before Moctezuma's court, smearing himself with ashes to prophesy the empire's fall. Their last performances left no artifacts, only whispers, a reminder that when the sacred and the subversive share a stage, the line between clown and prophet blurs beyond recognition. Bright wings flutter in the fading light, not from insects, but from warriors clad in iridescent mosaics of turquoise and gold, their feathered costumes shimmering with every movement like living butterflies. The Aztec butterfly warriors remain one of the most visually striking yet puzzling rituals, their imagery scattered across codices from the Borgia to the Borbonicus. At first glance, these figures seem straightforward elite fighters honored for their battlefield prowess, their fluttering attire symbolizing souls transformed after death. But dig deeper and contradictions emerge. Why do some butterfly warriors in the Florentine Codex hold farming tools instead of weapons? And why do excavation sites near agricultural temples yield identical feathered ornaments to those found in warrior graves? The warrior interpretation seems solid at first. Chronicler Diego Duron wrote that fallen fighters returned as hummingbirds and butterflies, their spirits feeding on flowers in the afterlife. Murals at Mesoamerica show butterfly-costumed figures alongside decapitated sacrificial victims, reinforcing the martial connection. Even the materials support this. Many recovered butterfly pectorals contain embedded human teeth, likely trophies from battles. But the agricultural evidence is just as compelling. The Codex Fejaverimea depicts butterfly dancers scattering seeds, their wings painted with corn kernels. At the Templo Mayor, archaeologists uncovered a cache of butterfly effigies buried with sprouted maize, their jade wings carved with rainwater symbols. Perhaps the answer lies in the butterfly's life cycle. Aztec cosmology obsessed over transformation, caterpillars becoming winged creatures, mirrored warriors transcending death, and seeds bursting into crops. The Codex Mendoza offers a clue. Butterfly warriors undergoing initiation were first smeared with sticky amaranth paste, a literal metamorphosis mimicking a chrysalis. Later, they emerged reborn in their radiant attire. This same paste was used in fertility rites, linking the ritual's two sides. The most compelling evidence comes from pollen analysis. Butterflies pollinate crops, and the Aztecs knew it. Excavated warrior costumes contained traces of maize, squash, and bean pollen trapped between feather layers. One ceremonial headdress from Texcoco even had its antennae tipped with orchid blossoms, a plant associated with both fallen warriors and bountiful harvests. The butterfly wasn't just a symbol of afterlife glory. It was a living bridge between bloodshed and bounty, its wings beating to the rhythm of both war drums and sprouting seeds. Modern debates continue because both interpretations hold truth. In the Aztec world, death fed life and battlefields nourished fields. The butterfly warrior wasn't an either-or figure but a duality embodied, a reminder that even the most delicate wings could carry the weight of both empire and earth. A child born on the day one crocodile would never be given a name without first consulting the priest's folding bark paper book, not because of superstition, but because in the Aztec world, destiny itself was written in the pages of the Tonalpohualli, the 260-day sacred calendar. This wasn't just a way to track time, it was a living grid of fate where every sunrise carried divine demands. Recent excavations at Tenochtitlan's ceremonial precinct uncovered something astonishing: 26 precisely spaced offering pits, each containing human remains with distinct patterns of trauma. One held a young woman whose ribcage bore the marks of flint knives in a starburst pattern, while another contained a warrior with his skull crushed by a single, ritualistic blow. The arrangement was no accident. These pits aligned perfectly with the Tonalpohualli's 20-day cycles, suggesting each sacrifice mirrored the specific energies of its calendrical moment. But here's where archaeologists hit a wall. While Spanish chroniclers recorded that the day one death required decapitation and that for rain demanded drowning victims, the physical evidence refuses to conform. At the Tlatelolco site, researchers found a mass grave from the year 1497, a year recorded in the Codex Telleriano-Rimensis as dominated by the day 7 flint, which supposedly called for heart extraction. Yet over half the skeletons show no chest trauma at all, instead displaying spiral fractures consistent with being hurled from heights. Were the chroniclers wrong, or was the ritual far more fluid than we've assumed? A breakthrough came from an unexpected source: botany. Sediment analysis revealed that certain pits contained pollen from flowers known to bloom only in specific months, while others held traces of frost-resistant evergreens. This suggests the Aztecs didn't just match sacrifice types to calendar days, but also to ecological cycles we're only now reconstructing. A day might demand fire sacrifices during drought years, but water offerings when the rainy season arrived early. The calendar wasn't a rigid script, but a dynamic conversation between the divine and the earthly. Perhaps the most haunting clue lies in the victims themselves. Isotope testing shows many came from regions corresponding to the day's associated cardinal direction. A child from the east sacrificed on one reed, a day linked to Quetzalcoatl's solar rebirth, or a fisherman from lake communities offered on days honoring Tlaloc. The real mystery isn't just how they died, but how they were chosen. Finger bones from several pits show minuscule tally marks, perhaps counting down the days until their fateful alignment. What emerges is a system both precise and terrifyingly adaptable, a celestial clock where human lives were the gears, their endings tuned not just to the stars, but to the ever-shifting whispers of wind, water, and war. The Tonopohuali's true power may have lain in its refusal to be fully decoded, a reminder that some divine conversations were never meant for mortal ears. Beneath the towering feathered serpent pyramid, archaeologists made a discovery that sent chills through the scientific community: a hidden chamber filled with shimmering liquid mercury, its silver surface rippling as if alive. This wasn't some natural deposit. The sheer volume, nearly 100 gallons pooled in 3 precisely carved basins, could only mean one thing. The Aztecs or their Teotihuacan predecessors had intentionally placed it there for reasons we're only beginning to grasp. The properties of mercury alone make it fascinating. This heavy metal, found naturally in cinnabar deposits across Mesoamerica, flows like water yet weighs 13 times more, defying everyday intuition. But why place it under a temple? One theory points to the Aztec underworld, Tlalocan, described in codices as a watery realm where the dead floated in eternal mist. Liquid mercury would have perfectly mirrored this vision. Its reflective surface could represent the boundary between worlds, while its toxic vapors might have induced the hallucinations priests sought for visions. Spanish accounts mention rivers that walked in underground rituals, possibly describing Mercury's uncanny mobility. Then there's the possible connection to the feathered serpent deity Quetzalcoatl. Murals at Teotihuacan show the god emerging from spirals that modern chemists argue resemble Mercury's liquid vortices. More startling is the discovery of cinnabar-covered skeletons nearby. Mercury's source mineral, ground into scarlet powder and used to paint the dead. Some researchers believe the mercury pools were part of a symbolic circuit, with the red pigment representing blood flowing from the living to the afterlife, and the liquid metal embodying the returning divine breath. But the most unsettling clue lies in the chamber's construction. The basins slope slightly, allowing mercury to cascade from one to another when disturbed, creating the illusion of a self-animating river. Footprint analysis suggests priests walked along a narrow ledge during ceremonies, their movements calculated to send ripples through the metal without falling in. Considering mercury's toxicity, this would have been a deadly dance. Were they literally flirting with the underworld's dangers to prove their devotion? Recent LiDAR scans reveal something even more astonishing. The pool room connects via a hidden channel to a cistern lined with crystalline quartz, a mineral capable of producing electric sparks under pressure. Some speculate the mercury may have been agitated during rituals to create primitive batteries, powering unknown devices or creating light effects for dramatic revelations. Others argue it was purely symbolic. After all, mercury never tarnishes, making it the ultimate metaphor for the immortal soul. The truth may be simpler and stranger. Analysis of the walls shows they were once coated in magnetite, a mineral that causes mercury to form bizarre, crawling shapes under magnetic influence. Imagine the spectacle: priests manipulating what appeared to be living metal, bending it into serpentine forms as worshippers watched from above through carefully placed vents. If so, this wasn't just a ritual space but the stage for an ancient miracle play, where nature's most puzzling substance became the actor in a drama of death and rebirth. What lingers is the danger those priests courted. Mercury exposure causes tremors, madness, and death, symptoms the Aztecs may have associated with divine possession. Perhaps the real ritual wasn't the pool itself, but the willingness to stand in that toxic chamber, breathing vapors that blurred the line between vision and reality. In the end, the mercury's silent shimmer holds onto its secrets just as it has for centuries, undisturbed in the dark. The mercury pools beneath Teotihuacan weren't an isolated phenomenon. 300 miles away at Chala, the ancient Toltec capital, archaeologists have uncovered eerily similar chambers lined with cinnabar residue and traces of liquid metal. This raises a spine-tingling possibility. The Aztecs may have inherited not just the feathered serpent cult from their Toltec predecessors, but the very rituals involving this mysterious substance. At Chelaz's Pyramid of Quetzalcoatl, workers restoring the iconic Atlantean columns stumbled upon something unexpected: a network of narrow channels radiating from the temple's base, their surfaces impregnated with mercury isotopes matching those found at Teotihuacan. The layout suggests a deliberate design, possibly to create the illusion of flowing silver during ceremonies, but the Toltec connection goes deeper than shared materials. Murals at both sites depict nearly identical scenes: priests wearing rubber-soled sandals, a bizarre detail until chemists realized rubber protects against mercury absorption, standing over reflective pools, their faces obscured by vapor. Even the timing aligns. Chelaz's mercury chambers date to around 900, just as Teotihuacan's were being sealed, as if knowledge migrated alongside power. The most striking parallel comes from an overlooked artifact, a Toltec figurine of Quetzalcoatl discovered at Chelaz, its hollow core containing a single drop of liquid mercury that still rolls freely when tilted. Modern analysis reveals the cavity was carved at a precise angle to keep the mercury in motion, creating an eternal shimmer for worshippers. Why would two cultures separated by centuries both fixate on this toxic metal? The answer may lie in shared cosmological panic. Toltec texts describe a cataclysm called the Son of Wind. When hurricanes supposedly scoured the Earth, Mercury's tendency to form swirling vortices could have mirrored this chaos. Later Aztec codices adapted the imagery, portraying mercury pools as the breath of Ehecatl, the wind god. Perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from Chelaz's ball court. Beneath its playing surface, researchers found mercury microdroplets embedded in the plaster, concentrated along lines marking the court's sacred axis. When mapped, these droplets form a near-perfect replica of the Pleiades constellation, a celestial pattern the Aztecs later incorporated into their new fire ceremonies. The implication is staggering. What we've assumed were distinct rituals might actually be chapters in an unbroken 500-year-old tradition, where mercury served as the ink in a celestial manuscript written across generations. The real mystery isn't just how the knowledge survived, but why it transformed. At Teotihuacan, mercury symbolized the underworld's boundary. At Chelaz, it became a divine breath. By Aztec times, it was both. This fluid symbolism hints at something profound: that the most sacred rituals weren't static commandments, but living traditions that evolved like the metal itself, reshaping to fit new worlds while retaining their uncanny essence. A polished obsidian disc glints under torchlight, not just a mirror, but a portal into the unseen. These smoking mirrors, or Tezcatl, were the Aztecs' most enigmatic divination tools, their Inkai surfaces believed to reveal everything from enemy troop movements to the fate of newborns. The British Museum holds one particularly baffling specimen, a hand-sized mirror with strange iridescent patches that shimmer purple and gold under certain angles. At first glance, it appears the surface has tarnished over centuries, but X-ray fluorescence scans tell a different story. These discolorations aren't natural oxidation, they're deliberate chemical treatments layered onto the volcanic glass with techniques we've only just begun to unravel. What makes this mirror extraordinary is the precision of its alterations. Microscopic analysis reveals three distinct coatings: a thin veneer of cinnabar mercury along the edges, a central circle impregnated with iron oxide, and mysterious organic residues at the cardinal points. Together, these create a tripartite viewing experience. Gazing at the edges might reveal blood-red ripples, the center shows distorted reflections, and the treated zones induce optical illusions of depth. Spanish chronicler Bernardino de Sahagún documented priests interpreting visions based on which section the images appeared in. Warped faces in the iron oxide zone signaled bad omens, while figures emerging from the cinnabar border meant impending war. But why manipulate mirrors that were already considered magical? The answer might lie in synesthesia, the blending of senses. Recent experiments with replica mirrors show the treated zones produce slight hallucinations when viewed under flickering torchlight. especially after ingesting ritual substances like ololiuqui seeds. A priest staring into this chemically enhanced portal wouldn't just see reflections, they'd experience full sensory visions, with reported cases of hearing battle cries or smelling jasmine when viewing specific sections. The British Museum mirror's organic patches contain traces of DMT, a potent hallucinogen that could have transferred from a priest's fingertips during ceremonies. The manufacturing process adds another layer of mystery. Obsidian is notoriously difficult to alter without fracturing, yet this mirror shows signs of being heated precisely to 500 degrees Celsius, the temperature needed to expand its molecular structure just enough for chemical infusion without shattering. Even more astonishing, some patches correspond to constellations. The Pleiades pattern appears in one discolored cluster, suggesting celestial navigation played a role in their divinations. Perhaps most chilling are the accounts of what these mirrors allegedly revealed. The Codex Mendoza depicts Moctezuma consulting a smoking mirror on the eve of the Spanish arrival, the surface reportedly showing towers floating on water and men with faces of chalk. Whether optical trickery, psychoactive reactions, or something beyond our understanding, these mirrors weren't just tools, they were collaborators in prophecy. Their manufactured flaws carefully orchestrated to distort reality in ways that served both priest and empire. The real question isn't how they worked, but what truths or deceptions they helped spin into history. The battlefield smoke clears to reveal a scene that baffles modern scholars: rows of warriors standing bound but unharmed, their elaborate feather headdresses still intact as priests move among them, selecting individuals with almost clinical detachment. This was the Xochitl, or Flower War, a ritualized conflict that defies our modern definitions of both war and sport. Spanish accounts describe these battles as staged events to supply sacrificial victims, but archaeological evidence paints a far more complex picture. Excavations across different city-states reveal startling inconsistencies. Some mass graves show captives with healed battlefield injuries and signs of good nutrition, while others display skeletons with evidence of prolonged torture before death. Take the remains found at Tlaxcala, a sworn enemy of the Aztecs. Here, Flower War captives show clean, ceremonial cuts to the ribcage consistent with swift heart extraction, their bones buried alongside fine pottery and jade beads. Contrast this with findings at Huexotzinco, where skeletons exhibit broken fingers methodically snapped in sequence and vertebrae drilled with small holes, suggesting slow, ritualistic suffering. The discrepancy forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about these wars. Were they really just about obtaining sacrifices, or did each city-state imbue the practice with its own theological and political meanings? The trophies tell another story. At Tenochtitlan, archaeologists uncovered skull racks where every fifth cranium bore identical fractures, precise blows to the temporal bone that would have caused instant death. Yet in nearby Texcoco, captive skulls show multiple healed wounds, proving they survived previous battles before finally meeting their end. This suggests some warriors were captured repeatedly, almost as if participating in an ongoing ritual rather than a one-time sacrifice. Contemporary accounts from the Tlaxcalans themselves add fuel to the debate. Their pictorial histories depict flower wars as sporting events with set rules and referees, where the losers went willingly to sacrifice while the winners kept their elaborate regalia as prizes. Forensic breakthroughs further complicate the narrative. Isotope analysis of teeth from victims at different sites reveals something astonishing: many so-called enemies actually grew up in the same regions as their captors, possibly as political hostages raised to eventually become ritual combatants. Imagine a warrior recognizing childhood friends across the battlefield, knowing their clash would end not in slaughter but in ceremonial selection. Some skeletons even show dental modifications matching their captors' styles, hinting at years of cultural assimilation before their deaths. The timing of these wars adds another layer. Agricultural studies of lakebed sediments show flower war frequencies spike during drought years, suggesting they may have served as meteorological bargaining chips, city-states potentially wagering their warriors against rainfall in a macabre kind of divine negotiation. The most chilling evidence comes from recent LiDAR scans uncovering hidden causeways between rival capitals, their construction dates aligning perfectly with major flower war periods. These weren't makeshift paths, but carefully engineered routes flanked by viewing platforms. Were these battles as much public spectacle as spiritual necessity? Perhaps the most poignant finds are the personal effects. At a recently discovered mass grave near Cuauhtincan, archaeologists unearthed warriors buried with small figurines clutched in their hands, each one meticulously carved to resemble their captors' gods rather than their own. This wasn't random war booty, but what appears to be deliberate cultural exchange conducted at the edge of the sacrificial knife. The flower wars may represent something far more profound than ritualized violence, a complex social institution where enemies negotiated identity, power, and even faith through carefully choreographed combat. What emerges isn't the straightforward sacrificial system the Spanish described, but a living tradition that evolved across generations and regions. The inconsistencies in treatment, from honorable dispatch to prolonged agony, reflect not random cruelty, but a sophisticated language of ritual where every fracture and burial position carried specific meanings we're only beginning to decipher. These warriors didn't just feed the gods, they wove together politics, agriculture, and cosmology in ways that made their deaths not an end, but a conversation across city-states and centuries. Beneath the shadow of the Templo Mayor, archaeologists uncovered rows of canine skeletons, some carefully arranged with jade beads between their teeth, others bearing unmistakable cut marks from stone blades. These 400 sacred dog burials present a paradox that challenges modern assumptions about Aztec rituals. Why would a civilization that adorned some dogs like royalty leave others with traces of butchering? The answer may lie in the duality of the dog's role in Aztec cosmology, both divine guides to the underworld and practical contributors to survival. The most elaborately decorated specimens tell one part of the story. Infrared scans of turquoise inlaid skulls reveal something astonishing. The gemstones were affixed not with adhesive, but with a resin made from ground bone, possibly from the dogs themselves. These animals, likely hairless zoloids squently bred for ritual purposes, were buried with their paws folded as if in sleep, their spines decorated with shell discs representing the stars. The Codex Mendoza depicts such dogs accompanying warriors' souls across the 9 treacherous rivers of Mictlan, the underworld. But here's where it gets complicated. Isotope analysis shows these privileged canines ate diets rich in maize and even chocolate, while their butchered counterparts subsisted on scraps and human food waste. The split in treatment becomes even clearer when examining skeletal evidence. Dogs buried near elite residences often show healed fractures consistent with pampered pets' broken legs from jumping off temple steps, worn teeth from chewing leather toys. Meanwhile, those found in middens and workshop areas display vertebrae nicks from precision cuts, suggesting skilled butchery for consumption. Spanish accounts mention marketplace vendors selling dog meat alongside turkey and rabbit, yet the same chroniclers describe Zolos sleeping in nobles' beds. This wasn't hypocrisy, it reflected a worldview where dogs straddled multiple roles. Recent forensic breakthroughs add nuance. Scanning electron microscopy on a group of skeletons from the Templo Mayor's base revealed something unexpected. Some butchered dogs had turquoise dust in their nasal cavities, while adorned specimens occasionally showed old knife wounds. This suggests the categories weren't rigid. A dog might serve as a companion before becoming food, or transition from scavenger to sacred guardian based on omens. The Florentine Codex describes priests interpreting a dog's behavior during the new fire ceremony. Those that barked at shadows were immediately sacrificed, while quiet ones earned jeweled collars. Perhaps the most poignant discovery came from a puppy burial near the Templo Mayor's serpent wall. This young Zolo wore an elaborate copper pendant, but also had its ribs broken in a pattern matching ceremonial heart extraction. In the Aztec universe, even the sacred could become sacrificial, not as punishment but as participation in the cosmic cycle. The turquoise adorned and the butchered weren't opposites but partners in a deeper ritual logic, where every dog's fate, whether as guide or meal, served the balance of the world. What lingers isn't just the mystery of their treatment, but the intimacy of these burials. One adult Zolo was found with a child's handprint in clay pressed against its side, a final farewell that transcends time. In these silent graves, the Aztecs left us not just puzzles to solve, but relationships to contemplate between human and animal, between the practical and the divine, between the hands that fed and the blades that sacrificed. The dogs of Tenochtitlan didn't just accompany souls to the afterlife, they carried the weight of an empire's contradictions on their silent, wagging backs. The frothy white liquid swirls in the ceremonial cup, its sour scent mixing with copal incense as the priest raises the vessel to his lips. This was pulque, the sacred fermented drink of the Aztecs, brewed from the megi plant and reserved for rituals that walked the razor's edge between ecstasy and oblivion. Murals at Collula show gods with pulque dripping from their nostrils, their eyes rolled back in divine rapture, while Spanish chroniclers recorded scenes of nobles vomiting in temple courtyards after drinking to the point of collapse. But beneath the apparent chaos lay strict rules. Most strikingly, the absolute prohibition against women consuming pulque, punishable by death. Despite the drink's deep ties to goddesses like Meahul, the divine Magi woman whose 400 breasts supposedly fed the stars. This contradiction sparks one of archaeology's most heated debates. On one hand, the Florentine Codex describes pulque as the blood of Meahul, a liquid incarnation of feminine divinity. Yet excavations at pulque production sites reveal chilling evidence near Chala. Archaeologists uncovered the skeleton of a young woman buried beneath a fermentation vat, her skull crushed by a Magi spike, a grim warning against violating the ban. Why such extreme measures? The answer may lie in pulque's dual nature. Chemical analysis of residue from ritual jars shows the ceremonial brew was often laced with psychotropic mushrooms or ololiuqui seeds, creating a cocktail far more potent than the everyday version. The gender prohibition wasn't just about intoxication, it was about control. Spanish accounts describe male-only pulque rituals where participants confessed sins under the drink's influence, their slurred words interpreted as divine revelations. This created a spiritual feedback loop. Men could access the divine through altered states, while women, despite their association with the Magi's life-giving properties, were excluded from its most potent form. The archaeological record holds disturbing proof of enforcement at Tenochtitlan's outskirts. Forensic anthropologists identified female skeletons with eroded tooth enamel, a telltale sign of chronic pulque consumption. Several showed evidence of execution-style blows to the head, yet the story isn't so simple. While elite women faced death for drinking pulque, midden excavations reveal working-class women routinely handled the Magi harvest. Their graves often contained tools for scraping the plant's sap, their fingers preserved with telltale calluses. Even more intriguing, some noble women's tombs include pulque vessels not for drinking but as symbolic wombs. The Codex Borgia depicts Meahul emerging from just such a jar, suggesting women may have been barred from consuming pulque precisely because they were considered its living embodiments. The physiological aspect adds another layer. Modern studies show pulque's enzymes interact unpredictably with estrogen, potentially causing violent illness in pregnant women, a fact the Aztecs may have observed empirically. Some scholars argue the prohibition was less about oppression than protection, with the death penalty serving as hyperbolic deterrence. Evidence from childbirth-related artifacts supports this. Many midwifery kits contain pulque-soaked cloths for external use only, hinting at medicinal knowledge behind the taboo. Perhaps the most revealing clue comes from an overlooked detail in the ritual itself. During high ceremonies, priests would don female attire while drinking pulque, their faces painted with Mayahule symbols. In this costumed state, they became the goddess they denied mortal women, a sacred transgression that blurred gender lines even as it reinforced them. The pulque rites weren't just about intoxication, but about who had the right to embody the divine and at what cost. What lingers isn't just the brutality of enforcement, but the complexity of the reasoning behind it. In a civilization where blood and sap, goddesses and intoxicants, fertility and death were inextricably linked, pulque became the liquid paradox of feminine divinity only men could drink, a sacred ecstasy that demanded sober control, a gift from breasts in the sky that real women were forbidden to taste. The empty cups found in women's graves say it all. They could hold the vessel, but never the power it contained. The thick woven wrappings crackle as aged fibers part beneath the priest's trembling fingers, a sound echoed by the collective gasp of onlookers gathered in the temple courtyard. This was the moment of the god bundle opening, a ceremony so rare it occurred only once every 52 years, when the sacred tilak Huimiloli containing the divine essence of Tezcatlipoca or Huitzilopochtli was ceremonially unwrapped. Spanish chroniclers described these bundles as towering parcels taller than a man, layered with embroidered fabrics, jade beads, and even hummingbird feathers, yet when opened before the crowds, many reportedly contained nothing but a handful of aromatic herbs or a single carved bone. What could explain such an elaborate ritual surrounding seemingly empty relics? The answer may lie in the wrapping itself. Chemical analysis of residue from preserved bundle fragments reveals something startling. The inner layers were impregnated with psychoactive compounds including bufotenin from toad venom and psilocybin from mushrooms. When heated by ritual torches, these fabrics would have released mind-altering vapors, transforming the unwrapping ceremony into a multisensory experience where the presence of the god was felt rather than seen. The Codex Fejavari Maya depicts priests emerging from these rituals with swirling vision lines around their heads, suggesting the bundles functioned less as containers than as spiritual catalysts. But the mystery deepens when examining the few physical artifacts found within. At Templo Maya, archaeologists discovered a miniature bundle no larger than a fist inside one of the stone coffers where these objects were stored between ceremonies. CT scans revealed 9 tiny obsidian blades arranged in a starburst pattern around a central void, a configuration matching descriptions of the mirror smoke constellation in Aztec star charts. This celestial connection raises provocative questions. Were the bundles astronomical maps in disguise, their unwrapping time to celestial events modern archaeologists haven't yet decoded? Perhaps most perplexing are the accounts of bundle reactions. Friar Diego Duran recorded witnesses claiming the fabrics moved like breathing during ceremonies, while the Florentine Codex describes the scent of decaying flowers intensifying as wrappings were removed. Modern experiments with replicated bundles show how clever construction could produce such effects. Certain quilted layers expand when exposed to moisture, while compartments filled with specific resin mixtures emit variable odors as temperature changes. This wasn't crude stagecraft but sophisticated spiritual technology, designed to manifest the intangible through carefully orchestrated sensory cues. The greatest revelation may come not from what the bundles contained, but how they were handled. Excavations at Melanalco uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the main temple where apprentice priests practiced wrapping and unwrapping dummy bundles in total darkness. The walls bear striation marks from countless ropes being pulled taut, while the floor holds the indentations of kneeling positions worn smooth by generations of unseen rituals. Here, in this lightless rehearsal space, we glimpse the true purpose of these sacred objects not as vessels for physical relics, but as focal points for faith itself. Their emptiness demanding believers confront the divine not through idols but through disciplined imagination. What endures is the paradox that the bundle's power grew from their very lack of contents. In a civilization that built towering pyramids and gold-adorned temples, these humble wrapped packages represented the opposite impulse, a belief that the most sacred things couldn't be seen or held, only approached through layers of mystery and ceremony. When the last priest unwrapped the final bundle before Cortez's arrival, perhaps he revealed the most profound truth of all, that faith, like those carefully wound fabrics, gains its strength not from what it contains but from the act of devotion itself. Before the first light touched the temple steps, before the incense curled toward the heavens, came a ritual so ordinary yet so sacred, the sweeping of the sacred spaces. Archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of ceremonial brooms at sites like Templo Mayor, their handles carved with intricate geometric patterns and their bristles bound with human hair or jaguar fur. At first glance, they resemble everyday cleaning tools until you notice the microscopic traces of blood and ground jade embedded in the fibers, or the way each broom's weight was precisely balanced to mimic the movement of celestial bodies. These weren't mere housekeeping implements. Murals at Teotihuacan depict priests sweeping in slow, measured arcs, their motions synchronized to the rhythm of drums. The sweeping wasn't just about removing physical dirt, it was about purifying time itself. Spanish chroniclers recorded that the act always preceded major festivals, aligning with the 5 hollow days at the end of the Aztec calendar, when the boundaries between worlds were believed to thin. The broom's bristles, often made from grasses harvested during specific lunar phases, acted as metaphysical filters, trapping chaotic energies in their fibers. After each use, they were ceremonially burned in clay braziers, the smoke carrying disorder back to the cosmos. But the real mystery lies in the sweeping paths themselves. LiDAR scans of temple floors reveal something extraordinary, worn grooves forming precise spirals that mirror the Milky Way's curve as seen from Tenochtitlan during the winter solstice. Some brooms even had obsidian chips embedded near the base, leaving faint scratches that, when mapped over years of sweeping, would have gradually etched sacred constellations into the stone. The most bewildering discovery came from a bundle of brooms found sealed beneath the Templo Mayor's serpent wall. Their handles contained hollow chambers filled with mercury, a substance the Aztecs associated with divine liquidity. When shaken, these brooms would have produced a sound like falling rain, turning the act of sweeping into an auditory invocation of Tlaloc's blessing. Why go to such lengths for what seems like simple cleaning? The answer may lie in the Aztec concept of Tlazolli, a force that encompassed both literal dirt and moral disorder. Sweeping wasn't maintenance, it was exorcism. The Codex Borgia shows Ehecatl, the wind god, wielding a broom to clear a path for the sun's daily rebirth, suggesting these rituals reenacted cosmic order from chaos. Yet contradictions emerge. Some barrio temples show evidence of communal sweeping, with broom handles worn smooth by countless hands, while elite ceremonies restricted the act to priests wearing masks of the earth monster Tlalochtecutli. Was this about collective purification or hierarchical control? The brooms themselves whisper conflicting clues. Some are child-sized, their bristles barely used, hinting at initiation rites. Others show teeth marks as if participants had bitten the handles during trance states. Perhaps the most haunting evidence comes from the act's aftermath. Excavations reveal that swept debris wasn't discarded but collected in ceremonial urns mixed with sacrificial ashes. These vessels were then buried at crossroads, not to dispose of impurity, but to plant it like seeds, ensuring the cycle of disorder and cleansing would continue. In the end, these brooms embody the Aztec genius for transforming mundane acts into sacred theater. Every stroke across the stones was a prayer, every coiled bristle a lightning rod for the divine. What we dismissed as housekeeping was actually a dance with entropy itself, performed with tools as carefully engineered as the temples they maintained. The real question isn't why they swept so ritually, but what modern minds might be missing by seeing brooms as merely brooms. Thin strips of bark paper flutter in the temple breeze, each one positioned with geometric precision beneath the sacrificial stone, not to soak up the crimson flow but to capture it. These weren't mere spill rags, they were sacred canvases, their fibrous surfaces absorbing the lifeblood of offerings while priests chanted incantations over them. Excavations at Tlatelolco uncovered a cache of these paper strips sealed in a volcanic stone box, their once white surfaces now rust-brown with centuries-old hemoglobin. What makes these relics so baffling isn't just their preservation, but the intricate glyphs pressed into the bloodstains patterns that defy all known Aztec writing systems, their swirling designs more reminiscent of rippling water or wind patterns than any formal script. The paper itself holds clues to its ritual significance. Fiber analysis reveals it was made from the inner bark of wild fig trees, the same material used for sacred codices, but with a crucial difference. These strips were layered with minuscule perforations, almost invisible to the naked eye, allowing blood to penetrate multiple sheets simultaneously. The Codex Borgia depicts this process in eerie detail, priests stacking 5 sheets beneath a victim's chest, each layer catching different components of the blood as it fell. Modern forensic studies confirm this stratification. The topmost sheets contain oxygen-rich arterial blood, while deeper layers show the darker, clotted traces of venous flow. But the glyphs remain stubbornly enigmatic. Some resemble stylized raindrops, others mimic the branching patterns of nerves or rivers. The most perplexing examples display geometric precision that would require tools far finer than the obsidian blades found nearby. One strip from Tenochtitlan's ceremonial precinct shows a repeating fractal pattern that only becomes visible under ultraviolet light, a property the Aztecs couldn't have consciously engineered, yet which appears too deliberate to be random. Theories about their purpose range from the practical to the esoteric. Some researchers suggest these were ritual medical records with blood patterns indicating divine diagnoses. Others point to their resemblance to surviving star maps in Mixtec codices, proposing they charted celestial events through hematological divination. The most compelling evidence comes from an unexpected source, modern hematology. When scientists rehydrated fragments of these paper strips, they discovered the blood had been mixed with a saline solution prior to absorption, causing hemoglobin crystals to form specific angular shapes under magnification. Was this accidental, or did priests possess knowledge of blood chemistry that allowed them to program these organic tablets? Perhaps the most haunting discovery came from a bundle of these papers found beneath the Templo Mayor's serpent heads. Infrared imaging revealed child-sized handprints pressed into the bloodstains, not from handling the papers, but from small hands that had clearly been dipped in blood before touching the surface. The prints show no smudging, suggesting the children held their positions until the liquid dried. Were these young participants in the ritual, or was their touch believed to imbue the papers with some vital essence? The true function of these blood catchers may lie beyond our modern categories of writing or art. Like the quipu strings of the Andes or the Viking rune stones, they could represent a completely lost system of communication, one where meaning wasn't inscribed but grown from the interaction of organic materials and sacred intention. What survives isn't just paper and iron oxides, but the ghostly fingerprints of a worldview that saw blood not as waste, but as ink waiting to reveal secrets only the gods could read. As these fragile sheets crumble under time's weight, they take with them answers we've only begun to question. The real mystery isn't just what these glyphs meant, but how an empire without microscopes or chemistry could develop a technology that still challenges our understanding today. In these paper-thin relics, the Aztecs left us not just puzzles but a challenge to reconsider where knowledge ends and magic begins. Shadows lengthen across the courtyard as the last embers of daylight fade. This was Miquel Huitantli, the little feast of the dead, when the veil between worlds grew thin enough for ancestors to step back into the realm of the living. Excavations across Tenochtitlan's former neighborhoods reveal a haunting disparity. Some homes contained intricate altars lined with jade beads and miniature effigies, while others showed no trace of ritual activity whatsoever. Why would some families go to extravagant lengths to welcome the dead while their neighbors seemingly ignored this sacred tradition? The answer lies in the Aztec concept of tonali, the life force that determined not just who returned, but how they could interact with the living. Forensic archaeology paints a vivid picture of these rituals. In the opulent districts near Templo Maya, researchers uncovered ancestor altars with multiple layers of offerings, clay pipes still scented with copal resin, plates bearing traces of tamales and chocolate, even small cages that once held live quails for sacrificial release. These weren't generic displays, each element held personal significance. One altar contained a child's figurine clutching a toy dart, its base inscribed with calendrical glyphs matching the occupant's birthday. Another held a woven mat imprinted with the silhouette of a reclining body, as if reserving space for an invisible guest. Yet just 3 blocks away in the artisan's quarter, midden pits show only scattered bone fragments and broken pottery from ordinary meals. The difference wasn't wealth alone, it was status. Aztec belief held that only those who died specific deaths, warriors, childbirth casualties, drowning victims, or who had significant social standing retained enough tonally to return. Commoners who died of old age or disease were thought to dissolve into the cosmic ether, their essence too dispersed for communication. Isotope analysis of teeth from both districts confirms this hierarchy. Altar-building households often included individuals with combat injuries or elite burial goods, while simpler graves showed markers of mundane lives and death. The rituals themselves were timed to celestial precision. Murals at Teotihuacan depict processions of spectral figures emerging during the Pleiades' zenith, their ghostly forms painted with a luminous mineral pigment that glows faintly under UV light, perhaps meant to represent the ancestors' arrival under specific starlight. Modern astronomers have calculated that these nighttime summonings coincided with the galaxy's most active meteor showers, turning natural phenomena into sacred theater. But the most chilling evidence comes from an overlooked burial custom. In homes with ancestor altars, archaeologists frequently find infant skeletons interred beneath hearthstones, their tiny bodies curled as if in sleep, hands clutching miniature replicas of tools used by deceased family members. These weren't sacrificial victims, but naturally deceased children buried as symbolic bridges between realms. Their grave goods, a baker's child with a clay rolling pin, a warrior's descendant with a tiny obsidian blade, suggest each generation's youngest members served as spiritual liaisons, their purity allowing safer communion with the dead. The absence of these practices in other households speaks volumes. For most Aztecs, death was an ending, not a continuation. Only the privileged few had ancestors potent enough to merit summoning. Yet even this divide had exceptions. Excavations at a fisherfolk village near Lake Xochimilco revealed crude but heartfelt ancestor shrines made from repurposed nets and canoe fragments, proving some commoners found ways to honor their dead outside official doctrine. What lingers isn't just the physical remnants of these rituals, but their emotional weight. The careful placement of a grandmother's favorite chili grinder on her altar, the faint impressions of fingers in copal ash where someone once traced a message. These intimate details suggest the Aztecs didn't just venerate ancestors, they missed them. The real mystery isn't why some homes lacked altars, but how an entire civilization balanced grieving with pragmatism, reserving their most elaborate rituals for those whose tonally burned bright enough to light the way home. Flames sputter against damp, kindling an ominous sign for the priests gathered atop the Hill of the Star in 1519. This was the new fire ceremony, the ritual that had marked the rebirth of time for centuries, now unfolding under circumstances that would etch it into history. According to the Codex Borbonicus, the ceremony should have proceeded as always, a captive warrior's chest open to spark the sacred flame, his sacrifice ensuring another 52-year cycle. But the night was wrong. Torrential rains had soaked the gathered crowds, and worse, Spanish ships lurked unseen off the coast, their sails like ghosts on the horizon. Did the Aztecs truly interpret these events as an apocalyptic omen, or is this narrative a later invention shaped by conquest's hindsight? The answer lies in the details contemporary accounts ignored. Start with the celestial timing. The Aztec calendar was precise. Their astronomers could predict Venus's movements within hours. Yet the 1519 ceremony occurred under clouded skies that obscured the Pleiades' zenith, the critical marker for the ritual's success. Excavations at the Hill of the Star reveal something startling. Priests had prepared a contingency. Beneath the main platform, archaeologists found a smaller, drier chamber with a perfectly preserved obsidian fire drill, its tip blackened from trial runs. This backup plan suggests they anticipated problems, yet proceeded anyway. Was this faith or something more pragmatic? The captives tell another story. Normally, warriors from rival city-states were chosen for the honor of kindling the new fire. But skeletal remains near the site show anomalies. One young man's teeth bear grooves consistent with coastal diets, yet his burial includes jade from Maya territories. Spanish accounts mention Moctezuma demanding strangers with foreign gods for the ceremony. Could this have been one of Cortez's shipwrecked companions, captured and repurposed for a ritual suddenly hungry for omens? The fire itself adds to the mystery. Traditional new fire blazes were fueled by cedar, but soil samples from 1519 contain traces of a rare, fast-burning pine imported from the highlands. This wood produces thick smoke visible for miles and burns out quickly. Was this a signal to outlying provinces or an attempt to outpace the storm? The Florentine Codex describes the flame as weak and spitting, lasting only days before being relit from temple embers. Later Nahuatl texts, however, claim it burned unnaturally bright, hurting the eyes of those who watched. The conquest narrative often frames this ceremony as the Aztecs misinterpreted doomsday. But colonial-era legal documents uncovered in Seville reveal a different angle. Moctezuma's spies had been tracking the Spanish for months. A previously overlooked passage in the Codex Mendoza shows astronomers recording towers on water in their almanacs weeks before landfall. This suggests the emperor may have weaponized the ritual, using its cosmic stakes to unify fractious city-states against a coming threat. What clinches the debate are the children. Excavations near the Hill of the Star uncovered dozens of infant burials from that year, far more than usual, each with a scorched corn kernel in their mouths. Modern botanists confirm these kernels were from last season harvests, normally reserved for planting. By sacrificing next year's seeds, the Aztecs weren't surrendering to doom, they were hedging their bets. If the gods rejected the fire, at least the children's spirits could plead for next year's crops. The final irony, Cortez landed on the day one read the same date the Codex Borgia predicted Quetzalcoatl's return. Yet there's no evidence the Aztecs initially connected the two events. That link only solidified years later, when surviving priests recast the conquest as prophecy to make sense of their world's unthinkable collapse. The real omen wasn't in the stars, but in history's ruthless habit of rewriting rituals in hindsight's crushing light. 25 rituals spanning cosmic ceremonies to intimate household devotions, each one a thread in the vast, intricate tapestry of Aztec spirituality. What emerges from these ancient practices isn't a simple dichotomy of brutality and beauty, but a civilization that viewed the universe as a living equation, where every drop of blood, every grain of maize, every whispered prayer balanced the scales between chaos and order. The Aztecs didn't just worship their gods, they collaborated with them, negotiating the terms of existence through rituals that blended astronomy, agriculture, politics, and art into a single fluid dialogue. Consider the contradictions that still baffle us. a culture capable of calculating Venus's cycles with pinpoint accuracy, yet believing the sun required human hearts to rise each morning. Priests who performed precise anatomical sacrifices with obsidian blades sharper than modern surgical steel, yet saw those same hearts as celestial currency. Warriors who embraced death on the ball court as both sport and sacrament, their skulls becoming part of architectural calendars. These aren't logical gaps, they're reminders that the Aztec world you operated on a different axis entirely, one where metaphor and mathematics were inseparable. The greatest testament to their complexity lies in what we've failed to reconstruct. For every ritual like the new fire ceremony, meticulously documented in codices and confirmed by archaeology, there are dozens more hinted at through fragmented artifacts or enigmatic murals. Why did the flayed skin dances abruptly shift from agricultural rites to displays of imperial power? What secret knowledge died with the last priests who understood the mercury mirror's true purpose? Even our most advanced technologies can't fully decode the blood-soaked papers or the child-sized handprints pressed into temple walls. Perhaps the most humbling realization is how much context has been lost to time and conquest. The Spanish burned libraries, yes, but even surviving texts resist easy interpretation. The glyphs on a butterfly warrior's shield might record a specific battle or symbolize the soul's metamorphosis. A Temazcal steam bath could be both a medical treatment and a spiritual rebirth. Without the living tradition to guide us, we're left piecing together a puzzle where half the pieces now exist only as echoes. Yet this uncertainty is what makes Aztec rituals so endlessly compelling. They challenge us to sit with ambiguity, to accept that some mysteries weren't meant to be solved, only witnessed. Maybe that's the true lesson of these 25 rituals, that understanding doesn't always mean reduction. Some truths are too vast, too woven into the fabric of a lost world to ever fully unravel. So we turn to you now. Which ritual left you awestruck or unsettled? The solemn precision of heart sacrifice, or the eerie beauty of paper gods consumed by flames? The astronomers who mapped stars onto stone, or the children whose tears became rain? Dive into the comments and share your thoughts, then join us as we continue unraveling history's greatest enigmas. Don't forget to subscribe. The past has far more secrets to spill, and we're just getting started.